Hello, gravel racing aficionados, and thanks for tuning in to episode 19 of Grodio. On this episode, Zach and Amanda are breaking down Unbound. My co-hosts were both on the ground in Emporia. Amanda was racing the 350-mile Unbound XL. Zach was out there supporting a team from Madison, Wisconsin, including Nowhere Fast co-host Mike Swart in the 200-mile race. And that's what we're really concentrating on, the 200-mile race, the, for now, premier event at Unbound, and the women's and men's races for that. Also going to get into the 100-mile event, and we're saving the 350-mile event, the one that Amanda took place in and finished on the podium in second place. We are going to save that conversation for anywhere from a couple days to a week from now. Amanda and Dave Sheik are going to compile all of their thoughts on preparation and the race and the whole experience of the Unbound XL, and that will be a separate episode 20 to come. But for now, we're talking Unbound 200. And before we get into it, I got to shout out one of our listeners who penned an email at grodio@gmail.com. Luke Lopez sent an email, called his shot, said, my projection, spoiler, is Ian Boswell. He's going to surprise the gravel community. Way to go, Luke. You did it. You called the winner. We should have had roller derby involved in this, and you could have put some money down there. I mean, fake internet money, but still the same. Great job. Shout out to Luke. He called it. If you want to get in touch with us, shoot us an email over at grodio@gmail.com or over on Twitter at Grodio. Okay. Before we get started, as always, and this is important, especially since we're doing all this coverage now, is we would love for you to become members of the Wide Angle Podium Podcast Network. Wide Angle Podium is independent media. We have shows covering most disciplines of cycling. And by becoming a member, donating to the network, that's how we continue to do what we do and bring you all of this coverage. WideAnglePodium.com. Go sign up, become a member, help us do what we do in the gravel space. Episode 19 of Grodio with Amanda and Zach. We're talking Unbound gravel, and we're doing that right now. We are back for Grodio. This is episode 19. We got Amanda and Zach fresh off of their experiences at Unbound. Let's actually jump right into it. And I think the 350-mile elephant in the room, Amanda, let's just start out. How are you doing? How are you holding up? What was the experience like? How different was it than the 200s?
All of the questions. Yeah, it's so many questions for so many miles. I am alive. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. I immediately said I would never do it again. And then within 24 hours, I was trying to figure out how I could do it better. So that, maybe probably says something about my personality. But yeah, it was I don't even know where to begin. It was crazy. I thought I knew what to expect in terms of the sleep deprivation and being tired and just continuing to pedal through the heat. But it was all of that and then some. And I learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. I made some big mistakes. I went out what I thought was hard, but I probably actually would have gone out harder because I tried to get away from Lael early and ended up standing in line at a gas station at mile 41, and all of that was for nothing. So, just little tactic things that came up along the way that I learned. But yeah, we're watching the sunset and then seemingly watch it rise shortly thereafter was an experience that was pretty crazy, especially out there and having done the 200 mile for quite a few years. It was something different to try and be out there for 350.
Yeah, and I know we have a ton of questions that came in about that, and we could do an entire episode on just the XL. So Zach, I think that's what we're going to do, right? We're going to come in next week and let Amanda take over and tell all about the XL. But for this episode, we got more storylines than we can cover for the 200 and even the 100. Where do we begin?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, for one, gravel is back. I mean, really, it was awesome that they were able to hold the event. And I guess being there, one thing that was really interesting is that there were all these COVID protocols that were in like the official, they were saying we were going to have to wear masks at the checkpoints. They were like at the checkpoints, we were going to have to stay in our car until the absolute last minute. People were going to have to wear masks at the start line. And that just kind of went out the window. And I guess I didn't feel concerned, but at the same time, like, I'm on being double vaccinated and trying to get back to a normal life. So it seemed normal. Like, the expo was great, a lot of energy. It was really cool to see a lot of the top riders were doing, shakeout rides the day before and being super accessible. So it felt like everything was back to what it was in 2019 and just continuing, I guess, down that road with what the event is. And I guess for me personally, I've said this before, I think I've seen less of the snark. I think a lot of the skeptics have been converted. And Amanda, you've hammered on this like a trillion times. But me personally, last year, we had big plans. We were going to cover Tim and Spencer from the slow ride, doing it on a tandem. We had big plans for the wide angle podium media empire. This time around, we didn't really make plans. No available money. We're saving that for cyclocross season to hit that running. But when my buddy was given a whirl, some of the Madison guys that I used to ride with when I lived there, they were like, "Hey, do you want to come do support for us?" I was like, absolutely. Like, I need to be a part of this event. Like, I need to be there. This is the best atmosphere at a bike race in America. And I just love being out there. I love covering it. So of course, since they weren't necessarily at the front, I took plenty of time to go take photos and kind of follow the race as best I could while still making it to the checkpoint. So that was super fun to like be able to pull double duty and do some quote unquote journalism and also be able to help them and kind of experience. And I guess it's really in that regard, we focus so much on the front of the race, right? Go to big cycling media and you'll see stories galore about the front of the race, but it was cool to get to see. I mean, these guys are not average, right? Like, these guys are all Cat 2 or Cat 1 on the road. Like, they are good cyclists, but to see what it does to excellent bike riders and how challenging it is, but to get that experience, to see what it's like from a participant, I think was really neat for me to, especially at checkpoint 2, to see, man, the conversations that are had, and to see like, these guys literally talked one of our guys into finishing because he was done. But then I was talking to Michael Vandenham about it. And he was like, yeah, same thing happened to me at checkpoint 2. I had to have a buddy be like, Michael, you're going to finish this or whatever. So I think that's Amanda Wright is kind of the appeal, is that everyone is going through kind of the same thing as even like the elites.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I hadn't really thought of reflecting on was the whole COVID situation. I didn't really think about that until you brought it up, because it felt so normal. It was so, besides going into places where, you still needed a mask for the most part going like indoors, there were still a lot of people, because Kansas has, if you're not, or if you are vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And so in a lot of areas, you just didn't have to. And David and I drove across, a few states to get to Kansas. And on the way there, we got made fun of for wearing a mask inside of places. So it was definitely a very unique and eye-opening experience to get out of California and do that. But like I said, for the most part, while we were there, it just felt very normal. And it was a breath of fresh air to be back and see everybody. For the most, I didn't get to see you, unfortunately, but I think it's a lot of hope for events moving forward. And I feel like we talked about the what ifs and how much it sucks and all of that for quite a few months now. And then to be able to come back together seemingly normal was pretty awesome. So I just wanted to mention that.
I will say, though, the Chic stash, he stared me down. Oh, man, did he stare me down at the start of the XL? I was like, oh, there's Dave. And then I look back at my photos and I was like, he's giving me the death eye.
Yeah, he did not.
I don't know what I did. I love Dave. I love your mustache. I don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Who is this creepy guy staring at me?
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, no, it was... it was pretty neat. The start of the XL was pretty cool. It was really annoying for those of us taking photos that they put a police car in front of y'all. And it was like... because it's pretty neat. They do it on a side road and like people are just lined up to see them off. And so it's still a pretty, neat send off to see, but it was like set up for this long shot with cars on either side and people. But then like the police car pulls out. And it's like, well, there goes that cool photo.
Oh, man.
So we'll have to live to fight another day. Should we dive into the thing? I guess we decided because, I mean, with these gravel races, it's covering it is difficult. And we've talked about this, I think, on the previous episodes of Grodio with respect to Unbound. You have the men kind of smashing at the front, and it's really easy to follow, up through the first checkpoint. There's relatively small time gaps, but things really start to open up. And I think as a journalist, it becomes really difficult because you're like going to the front, but then those guys are just hammering down the road. And then, the women come through and it just dealing with time gaps and trying to follow the race or whatever. But all of this is to say that I think that, this year especially, there was a lot of energy. There are a lot of people that just would like hop from like, they'd see the front group. They'd be like, we saw the front group. And then they go to the next spot and they'd be like, all right, the front group is still together. And I was like, you guys can like stick around and give the ladies some love. It's like, you guys can do this. So yeah, that was interesting. I think there were so much, like if you did not have a camera while you were walking around, like I almost felt like you were doing something wrong. Like if you didn't have like a professional camera set up, and like, an entourage of like 4 people doing interviews, I felt like you were kind of dropping the ball. Like there was so much media coverage there.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully none of it was live at the expo on Friday and Saturday, or else you would have gotten a nice cease and desist from Flow. But yes, there was a lot of media coverage, a lot of hoopla about this event, which is great. I think that means that gravel is alive and healthy. And I'm surprised that you said that about the women, them not sticking around to kind of get what the story was for the women's race, but surprised, also not surprised. It seemed very exciting from what I can tell on the outside looking in. And even while I was finishing, trying to ask people what happened in the last 30 miles of my event, I was passing people and people were passing me and I was like, who won? And nobody knew. We were all just like riding to try and find out what the results were as well. So it was a crazy, hectic Saturday.
Yeah, I have a story about that I'll get to when we cover, we get to the women's race. Although I guess I will say, I mean, to toot my own horn a little bit, like we covered the women's race pretty in depth, and I had like multiple people be like in 2019 reach out to say thank you so much for like even bothering to pretend we exist. So I think that is still a shortcoming. Although I guess looking at both the men and women in terms of the race reports that I saw, at least they were all pretty brief, relatively speaking, and I felt like they were comparable. But I don't know. I still have yet to find if anyone can send to me like a really comprehensive race report, but I'm just going to do that right now. I'm going to give you what I saw. So I think like the biggest thing is, we saw an additional influx of more World Tour riders, and especially former World Tour riders. I think, again, every year it's the most stacked field yet or the stackiest. I don't remember what I said. Yes. But, there were a lot of hitters at the front. And, it started out slowly. And so, last year there was that like great photo, Amanda, of you going, I'm just going to say last year, the last time we raced this, going full send ahead of East Caw Reserve Road at about mile 25, because you knew what was coming up. Mm-hmm. You wanted to get that good look at that gnarly, gross section. And I think that's where things really started to break up. Let me tell you, they were going so fast through that section. It was, wow. They were going so fast.
Were you at the entrance to it?
No, I was like halfway through.
Okay.
So I went like halfway through because
wow.
I didn't go last year, and I'm like, I can't miss this. My buddy had his Ford F-150 that he let me drive around. I was like, I got a big truck. Like, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
We're getting there. It was fierce. I mean, it was full on. And I mean, I posted some of the photos on our Instagram of the women and the looks on their face. I mean, it was all out going through this section. And, you know, we're talking descent of like just loose rock, double track, you know, riders flatting and tearing sidewalls if they try switching between sides, kind of like rollers and going through. But at the front, so it really kind of like, the front was just spread out through this section. And I think it came back together a little bit after that, but I was just blown away how fast they were going.
Yeah, and I think the difference was in 2019 for about half a mile leading up to where it got really chunky. It had been raining for the couple weeks before, and it was very muddy and rutted. And so because of that, everybody had to slow down leading into the very sketchy stuff. And this year, it was completely smooth. Like there had still been rain, but there obviously weren't any cars that had tried to drive through there and create those massive ruts. And because of that, you have this really smooth entrance into the most disgusting, chunky, rutted out stuff. And that's seemingly where everybody's tires started exploding. And probably that pace and the speed had something to do with it.
Yeah, so we had a couple... I mean, early in the race, we had a couple of mechanicals. We had Kiel Reinen. We'll get to it. We got one of our questions. Friend of the Wide Angle Podium Network and sometimes guest Scott Herman asked, you know, was Kiel Reinen noob mistake or heroic effort? Bill, what's your take?
I want you to explain exactly. Well, we can't explain what exactly happened. That's kind of at the heart of this. But what was reported and what this heroic feat, F-E-A-T or F-E-E-T, however you want to spell it.
Well done. Yeah.
What happened? What did he do? What's the lore that has been built?
Well, I'll jump in, Amanda, because I want to ask you about this because you have more UGG knowledge than anyone out there. So he broke his wheel quite early in the race, but he wanted to stick with the race. And so apparently he, according to him, ran 18 miles in his socks, not his shoes, his socks. I think before realizing that he would have had to get to mile, I think it was 68 was where the checkpoint was. And that was just probably a little too far. So, you know, it came out and it was Kiel Reinen, OMG, so cool, Spirit of Gravel. And then there were a few naysayers were like...
Well, I will say that they did, the people that just reading his Instagram now, somebody chimed in there, 18 miles, it would have been 7-minute miles in socks for 18 miles on gravel. So that's I think that would be the naysayer side of these.
That is seemingly impossible.
And if he's showing his sock, and again, I'm sure he ran some, but they're like still white. They got two little holes in them. I mean, my socks would be like red if I had run for 18 miles on gravel.
Yeah, like not just one little hole. I'd be bleeding.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so I can tell you I was at a barbecue the next day, and every single person there was... The first question was, what cleats was he riding? And then the second question was, well, that's why. Or the second comment. And yeah, he was apparently riding road cleats, which is your first mistake. And what I think a lot of people who have been there before were thinking was that you maybe brought this upon yourself to be put in that situation. And that you probably should have been riding some mountain cleats or something that you can actually run in instead of having to take your shoes off.
Okay, we have a Kale defender saying that he actually, it was 8 kilometers, or that he was running, so 5 miles per hour, so 12-minute miles. If that makes it reasonable.
So we had a math problem.
Yeah, and I knew that would. I mean, ultimately, that's the take, right? I mean, this is his second one too. I mean, he should have realized. Again, should have consulted Amanda. Like, most people are riding some sort of mountain cleat, mountain bike shoe. But I will say this, and I was about to say too, another rider who had an early mechanical was Payson McIlvaine. He was a race favorite. He was out. I read his Instagram, and he said that out of respect for the event and, gravel, like, he finished the race. And I'll get to why I mentioned this, that I think that is the super pro move. And so I give Keel a lot of credit for wanting to stick with it and not just packing it up and being like, oh, it's another race. This is a bummer. I'm out. And I had a lot of respect for any rider who kind of like recognize that this is what other people are doing, and this is what you came here to do, is to finish this event.
Especially that's his job, to race his bike, and part of that is having the feet in good order. So you are really putting the rest of your racing season in jeopardy by doing something like that. But I agree. I think it was awesome that he didn't want to quit. He wanted to at least try to make it to that checkpoint in time. He was not going to do it, and he didn't do it, but he made it there. And I think full respect, and I will let the internet fight over, if he went 18 miles, how fast he did, or any of that nonsense.
One little nice tidbit. I just got off the phone with Payson about an hour ago for a little mini interview with him. And he said that when he was like having all of these problems and he was out there and finally gets back up and rolling, he was like, I thought about you for a split second out there, Amanda, because the first time I came to DK and I didn't finish, and I was trying to explain to you why I didn't finish, I felt like you were so disappointed and you were looking at me like I just didn't get it yet. And he was like, I think I finally got it, and so I really was proud of myself for finishing. I was like, oh, good. So yeah, on that same vein, I think Kyle got the same message.
So when are you writing the handbook, the Unbound handbook? This should be happening. It needs to be. You have all of this, all of this experience, all of this insight. It needs to be a book.
I should. Yeah. Thanks.
So we had that. I think the next big moment, so things kind of came back together. I guess this was a fun little tidbit of just being out on the course, is there was this hard right turn, and the lead group just blows past it. I went back to my photos. The culprit was Dylan Johnson, was on the front, and he was the lead blower through of the thing. So everyone kind of like pulls a Yui and turns around. But as they're going by, so it was like me and one other photographer were there. And I hear in this very Dutch voice, "Why the fuck didn't you tell us to turn?" And I was like, "It's gravel, dude. Like, this is not how this works. It's not my job to tell you where the course is."
Yelling at you?
Oh, yeah. He was yelling at me and the other photographer. And I was like, I waited till he was kind of like a little bit further. I'm like, dude, this is gravel. This is not how it works. You're supposed to know the course. It's not my job to tell you where to turn. Like,
wow.
Do you know which Dutch rider it was? Was it 10 Dam or was it the beach guy?
I think it was probably one of the non-10 Dams. I felt like, I mean, he seemed pretty pro. I think he's just completely embraced the gravel experience. And I have so much respect.
Yeah, because he seemed like the most chill person. Yeah.
Yeah. So I blame one of the Dutchies who was in the front, but it was a very pronounced Dutch accent. So then probably the thing that so many people were talking about on the internet, and I have to say, like, covering these races, like, so much of it, you could be like, oh, they were in this, Bill, you know this, like, you're in the spot, you got the shot. I think so much of it's luck, especially on a course like this that's spread out over 200 miles. So like last year, Brad Kaminsky got the great shot of Colin attacking and looking back over his shoulder, and he happened to be at that spot. Will got that great shot. Will Matthews got that great shot, Amanda, of you off the front in front of Caw Road. And I was like, I really blew it this year. But this year, I feel like I was the guy who was in the spot. Like, I was there, and it's really funny because it was coming up. There was like, I could have gone right for a spot, or I could have gone left. literally, this is the choice, right? Like coming up this road, 2 spots to shoot. I'm like, I'm going to go left. So I went left. And so I guess right after this botched turn, there was a really gnarly descent. Again, they were going so fast, and there was a massive crash. Like a number of riders were involved with it. Like I heard about like from Matt Kerbo, who is a friend of Kevin Bouchard Hall, who's in We're Fast. We'll be talking. I think he's actually going to be a guest next week. We're going to talk about Unbound, but like carnage. Kerbo described it as a war zone, which very inappropriate. But you get the picture that I think a lot of people were injured. And so, I'm waiting. Again, perhaps a perk of waiting for the women's leaders. I don't know. Quinn Simmons, though, comes down off his bike, leg is bloody, goes to the truck. And I was like, because there's a lot of talk, right? Velo News wrote the story. They said everyone was Quinn Simmons. That was his name was ringing out. His name was ringing out on the internet. I posted a picture earlier. People were jumping in or whatever. I don't know. I felt like it was newsworthy. I was there. I got a photo because Bill hooked me up with an iPhone 11. I was able to pull off my Wi-Fi super fast. No problems with that. Got on the internet and it blew up. People
got the shot of the day.
Yeah, I was happy. I could have gone home at that point. I was like, I did my journalism.
I had to, take the reins and go after big media for taking Zach's shot. That's when you know. That's when you know it's a good one.
Yeah, when big media swoops in and like they didn't even contact me. They didn't even be like, hey, can we,
Right.
Not even the standard. I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe they did like the where they tweet at you. Hey, can we use? They just used it. I saw they did give me credit. But like,
Really?
Well, that was after I yelled at them.
Oh, after we called
but they
them
still
out.
didn't contact me.
Wow.
But yeah, so he was out, and I think it took out some other riders that kind of had aspirations. So you don't want to. But again, I think this speaks to like just the intensity that they were riding with. It was super intense, super fast, and some things happened. So we get to checkpoint 1. I think there were 14 riders in the lead group. So after all that, we're down to 14. The hitters were there. We were excited at Cyclocross Nation because Curtis White was there. Anyone? I'm trying to look. I can pull it up. But yeah, so that's what you kind of look for is kind of like who makes it to the first checkpoint. I know some riders were in a really bad place. Matteo Jorgensen was 2.5 minutes back, which he was kind of the first dangler. I guess there were 15 according to the official timing. Yeah, so Matteo was the dangler. Poor guy. It's a rough day.
Yeah.
He had a mechanical early and he was dangling. You don't want to be there.
He wasn't even on his own bike.
No, what happened?
So I saw him at the expo the day before and I just super fanned and took a picture with him and I was like, oh, how's it going? And he was like, not great. My bike is still stuck somewhere in customs or not here. And I was like, oh, well, hopefully you get it. And I was reading his Instagram that he never did get it. And he was riding a loaner bike. And a lot of the problems that he had out there were probably because he was on a loaner bike.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, Dylan Johnson, Curtis White, Travis McCabe was still in that front group.
Yeah. There were some riders. But so on this course, Amanda, like you can kind of, I would say that, you can speak to this, but it's very pretty. Like there's a certain stark beauty to it, like the juxtaposition of the vastness and the lush green and the beauty of it and the amount of suffering that you're going through. But I would say, generally speaking, there's not that many places that stick out. Like if you look at like places I stop, it's just like random place where I can get on the course without having to interfere with the race. But there's one section, the name rang out, Little Egypt. Do you remember this section from 2019, like around mile 100?
Oh, I do. And I wrote it in the dark this year.
Okay. So, the name, right? So can you,
Yes.
What made it tough? Like what was memorable and challenging about it?
It feels like no car has ever driven down it. And so it's very loose, baseball size gravel in some sections. I remember a giant log across one of the tracks. So if you happen to be on that side, you get caught out. And it starts going downhill, and then it's a pretty good steep climb on the other side of it. And all of it is the same kind of loose golf ball to baseball size rock. And that's what makes it difficult is you have to be going a little bit slower to be able to churn through it and have your tires at a good pressure so that you're not just like churning it underneath and you have to get off and walk. So yeah, it's difficult in the sense that you have to be able to balance well and know your tires and how to be careful through it, essentially.
Yeah. So, and then it has like the famous like climb, right? I think there's like a really memorable climb, and then there's a memorable descent. But then you're kind of like up on this ridge, which is kind of where I was able to kind of pop in and see things.
Oh, nice.
So this is where people started blowing up. Did they start exploding? And so our lead group was down to 5. But I also started to see people that were up near the front start to pull out. And so one thing that I've noticed, I guess just getting to my spiel on this, it seems like there are a lot of people who are master blasters and whatnot who come in thinking that like they're going to be those masters who get like top 20 or top 10s. And I don't know that that's the best idea, because this race is so challenging and it's so unforgiving. And the Flint Hills just have, what is it like? If you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. If you want to hear the Flint Hills laugh, tell them your aspirations for doing well at Unbound. Like, we were eating dinner on the night before the race, and there was some guy. He was a master. He's like, yeah, I'm aiming to finish under 11 hours. We quickly pull up Athlinks. Like, after he left, I'm like, that guy thinks he's going to finish top 10. That's bullshit. Like, what kind of hubris? Isn't that like borderline hubris? I mean, I would go in as being like, I want to finish.
Yep.
So this gets back. So I start just people pulling the plug at like mile 100, which gets back to Payson and Keel, and just the respect that I have for them not doing that and saying, I'm going to stick with it, instead of, just being like, oh, I'm going to go as hard as I can and then pull out. Like, I think so much more of the experience is finishing it versus thinking, worrying about your result. So I don't know, that was kind of like my thing of, coming back with the respect I have for them, starting to see people, just blow up and pull out.
Yes, definitely. And I criticized Robbie Carpenter for not necessarily wanting maybe to be at DK, but feeling like he had to be there. And he made a nice little write-up in Velo News afterwards about the race. And he talks about that Little Egypt section and how he didn't really know what to expect going in there, and immediately regretted not trying to hang on for dear life on the way out of that climb, because that's where he and Eric Marcotte got popped and why they didn't come into that next checkpoint with them together. And so it was funny to read through and hear how he, learned those mistakes absolutely the hard way. And yeah, it was interesting to see how very experienced guys came out of Little Egypt together with very strong guys, and I'm pretty sure it was that group of 5 for a very long time after that until it pretty much became a race between Ten Dam and Boswell, right? Yeah,
so our top 5 were Ted King. Mad props to Ted King. You know what? Like, especially after Gravel Locos, where he was riding well, but he pulled the plug, at least in terms of challenging for the win. So much respect for, the dude broke his collarbone like a month ago. And there were questions about whether or not he was going to race. Ted King, Peter Stetna, the villain, who's trying his hardest to do what did Super Rookie call it, Bill? When a heel turns into a good guy?
Face turn.
Face turn. So Stetna are doing his attempt at a face turn. Ian Boswell, Colin Strickland, and Lawrence Ten Dam. So kind of the hitters. I guess I'll get to the other thing that I wanted to say before I forget to say it. We did the preview, and Amanda, thanks so much for your help with that. Like, I thought that went over really well, and you were a huge part of helping with that.
That was the best preview on the internet.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
The Peter Flax seal of approval. That's not an easy thing to do.
I know that was pretty awesome to get that. But yeah, I think that I'll just be honest. I think it's become clear that you have to be a World Tour caliber rider to win this race as a man. And, even up to 2 years ago, it was like, here's all these diverse backgrounds or whatever. But it just seems like to have the ability to ride that hard at the front, you have to be a rider who has World Tour capabilities and to have been recognized for it. And I include Colin because Colin got a World Tour offer that he turned down. So, I mean, I look at this list and like these 5 guys were all, World Tour offered or World Tour riders, and they went on to win by like 17 minutes over sixth place at the end.
Yeah, and I talked to Colin right after the race, not too long after I finished on Saturday, and I asked him how it went, and he said that the best part about it was coming out of Little Egypt and having it be just those 5 guys. And he said that was the most thrilling part of the whole day, and where he was the most stoked was, yeah, there's so much hype about all these other dudes. And he was like, for it to come down to those 5 after Little Egypt, he was just so happy that that was it and that was the race, and they were going to work together and try and get as far ahead as possible. And yeah, he also told me that he had some issues coming into the day that he didn't really want to talk about too much, or he had some other stressful things going on. And so the Colin Strickland story is that he was just super jazzed to be there. Maybe a little bit bummed that he couldn't have defended it as well as he wanted to, but it was awesome to read kind of the stories from all 5 of those guys that they were just so stoked to be there.
Yeah, I read his Instagram. I guess he was up till like 10 p.m. the night before the race, which even I was in bed before 10 p.m. and I was just driving around in a car. But I guess he was doing, part of it was he made some, if you haven't seen it, he made this frame hydration pack. So he took it off his back, but he seemed to indicate that part of it was fabricating that like up until 10 p.m. And I just kind of wonder if he would have benefited from not to second guess a guy who's much better, but that's what we do. Screw it. That's what I do, is second guess people who are infinitely better at the sport than me. Maybe sacrificing, getting sleep, as we know that sleep is super important, especially going into a race where you're going up against these aforementioned superstars of gravel, and just taking one for the team. But anyway.
Yeah, no, definitely. David laughs whenever I start criticizing decisions like that. It's when I turn on like Tiger Mom mode. And I definitely did that with Colin. I wanted to be like, that wasn't a good decision, right? You know this. Like, why did you do that? But yeah, it's Colin. He can do whatever he wants to and still get top 5.
So another thing with this year's race is that this year's course went north, basically went straight north from Emporia, Big Long Lake to checkpoint 1. They're truly the Flint Hills. It kind of zigzagged back and forth, which it was funny because I was talking to my Madison guys and they're like, that sucked that we were like just kind of going back and forth. I'm like, it was great for the media. Think a course that kind of like loops in on itself versus like Reno Nationals. That's just a big loop around the outside. I was like, we loved it. But that is to say the entire way back was kind of like south in a southerly direction. And there was a wicked south wind. Oh boy. It must've been, I would guess at least 10 miles an hour of south wind. It was strong. And so I think that definitely precluded a Strickland-esque attack like we saw in 2019. I don't think anyone out of that group was going to attempt a hero ball move this time around. And so it seemed like, the play was to be content with that group. And they stayed together for 85 miles almost. It was like good 85 miles. And I guess that's kind of where the nice thing is I kind of checked out because I had to wait for my dudes at checkpoint 2, but we had TV coverage. Bill, were you watching?
I was checking in and out. I actually got to watch the end of the men's race, and then I tried to stick with the coverage. It got a little monotonous there until the women got in because they didn't really have any coverage of anything except for Masters rolling over the line. But it was the finish was great. I thought the post race interviews, especially with Ten Dam, amazing, and just talking about when that group finally broke up, and just the conversation that Boswell and Ten Dam had before that, which was I don't know if you're going to get to it. It was something that I know just put a smile on Jeff Kabush's face when Ten Dam was explaining it.
No, I didn't. I mean, I missed it. I wasn't there. You saw it, man.
Do tell.
Yeah, I'm assuming there is a climb within the last 20 miles, maybe.
There's like a dam or reservoir or something where there's a climb. So I think they called it like the dam climb.
The 10 Dam climb. So what I think the conversation in as I said, something that made Jeff Kabush's heart flutter was the two guys that did not have aero bars decided that at that climb, that is when they were going to basically attack the other three Pro Tour riders who all had the aero bars and try to get ahead there. And then once they were able to gap them, then they were going to work together till the finish. And you could see them coming in the last mile, and it was super cool. They had made that decision. They were going to race side by side, and they did it. You know, there was no drafting, there was no looking around until they got to the last kilometer, and then they raced it out for the win. And it was just it was really cool to see, and it was funny because before it was going on, as I said, I was at this crit, and I sat down with Brad. They were doing a broadcast, and I jumped on that for a little bit with Brad Soner, and was it's crit beef, so of course I had to bring up that McCabe was running scared from the crits by going and doing Unbound, which is a ridiculous statement, but Rob Kelly was there too, so I was trying to get him engaged in the crit beef conversation. But the funny thing is, Brad's like trying to explain to this other guy who knows nothing about cycling what the gravel race is. He was like, "Oh, it's more just like a ride, and everybody's separated and they're not together, and you can't really call it a race." And I was just looking at him like, "Yeah, I've been keeping up, Brad. that's not really how this goes." And
Wow.
and a couple of hours later, it's proven like a completely off base statement when we're watching two guys sprint it out after 200 miles. And the win is by inches. It was great. It was a great finish.
I talked to Payson McIlvaine after Mid-South in 2019 when it was him, Ted, and your boy, Dizzle, Dizzle Dillman. And he described it as the most slow motion, pathetic, worst sprint that he's ever been involved in. And I saw the video of the sprint and I was just laughing. That was, gravel sprints are not actually, maybe it's more interesting, but than like a road sprint because of the added, but what a slow motion kind of sprint.
Well, my dumb joke was, do you throw off your Camelback to lose weight before you get into the sprint at the end to finish it off? I will say the one, I know I spoiled it with giving it away that Boswell won, but the other great moment in the interview when they were talking to Lawrence Ten Dam is that he was taking solace in knowing that he won his age category.
Yes, he knows how it's played.
A true Masters.
Although he did say, I'm not getting any younger, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to come back and do this next year. So I guess,
which is a shame because he was a great character, and he you want to talk about the spirit of gravel. It seems like he definitely is a guy who has embraced that wholeheartedly. And you're right, not getting younger, but for right now, still has years of old man power to call back on at the highest level of the sport, and is able to put on a good show.
Before we get to one of our questions, I do want to say that one really neat thing that Ian Boswell did is he wore the transgender awareness bracelet. And it was cool that I want to say it was Payson, like he was passing them out to some of the other guys at the start, and Payson, one of them was like, "You're giving me a sweatband to wear to this ride." But he was kind of explaining what it was for. And it was cool to see them kind of embrace that and see, front and center with everything that's been going on, especially in our world in cyclocross, with Worlds in Arkansas and the conversations that have been happening across the board, and the work that Molly Cameron is doing. And, she was on your show, Bill, and stuff. So it was cool to see that, to him, make that statement and then win and do it in that way and bring more positive attention to kind of what's going on and the struggle that's going on in the sport and really in the world surrounding transgender rights. So I thought that was really cool.
Yep.
And then our question, it was something along the lines, I'm gonna misquote it, but is this the new thing for retired duchies to race gravel? I mean, are we going to see the duchies take over American gravel?
Yes.
What I like from that, let me just jump in there real quickly just to say this, is that what we have seen in the past, and we saw it with one of our, Belgian Dutch, sort of the same thing, but like Klaas van Tornout became a beach racer after retiring. And beach racing, big deal in the Netherlands, big deal in Belgium. And we had a big time beach racer, one of the Dutch guys, who was up near the front in this race as well. So I think that much like we talk about gravel being the new, what is it? Is it the new cyclocross? Is it the new, whatever it's the new for those guys who I think used to like go into the beach racing scene. Now this is the new beach racing.
You're talking about Jasper, right?
Yes.
Yes. I did not know that this was a thing until I read Robbie Carpenter's report, and he said he was in a group with the beach racing national champion, and I said, "What the heck is that?" So yeah, it looks like we got a beach racer, Dennis Van Winden, Lawrence Ten Dam. Who's the fourth one?
There was another one.
I don't know. I heard 4.
Oh, there was some guy named Ivar Silk.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
No.
4 Dutchies.
I don't know. Our friends at Cyclocross 24 were hitting me up and being like, "Hey, just so you know, keep your eye on these guys." And I think they did pretty well. They went,
So Vanderhaar and Vanderpool, they'll be over here before we know it. Lucinda Brand. Let's get Lulu over here.
Well, I'm just waiting. I mean, Wout's already called his shot. I think that's just going to be that is the year. I mean, gosh, Bill, we'll have more gray hairs than we do now for sure. But like when Wout does his American gravel retirement tour, I mean, I'm all aboard. I'm going to those events. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I think one thing that'll be interesting to see is I think with both Boswell and Ten Dam, I think we saw another step up in the caliber of World Tour riders that have come. I think that, they're guys who have gotten top 10s or, Boswell certainly had the talent from everything I've heard until he got hurt. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering, what'll happen if, guys who are like, can win spring classics or win tour stages start to be like, hey, I'm going to do gravel. I think that we're just going to see the ante upped, as it were, in the men's field. And I think that we're not at peak bonkerness in terms of the quality and the speed and the intensity of racing at the front of Unbound gravel.
I mean, you already got Strade Bianche. That's one of the favorite races of European pros right now. So they're already feeling it into like sort of the gravel junior races. So
we did the men. I think it's time to switch over to the women. A little bit, as I mentioned, it's a little bit more challenging to kind of make sense of what happens. It's really easy to follow the front. Bill, you've announced races. Anytime that there's multiple masters fields out in a cyclocross course, it becomes really hard, much more difficult to follow, whoever started second and third. And gosh, heaven help you if there's like 4 or 5 categories out on course at once. It becomes a little bit more challenging. But in terms of like fluidity, I think I would describe the women's race as like pretty fluid this year. There was definitely a lot going on at the front. So, we saw where it was kind of that fast pace and it was kind of, all hands on deck at the beginning for the first 60 or 70 miles, trying to see how things shook out. But at the first checkpoint, we definitely already had 2 riders that were at the top of the top of the heap. Was Laura Di Crescenzo, our eventual winner, and then Flavia Oliveira. They were 4 minutes ahead of Whitney Allison and Emily Newsome. And then behind them, another 2 minutes were Shayna Paulus and Amity Rockwell, which I guess really isn't too surprising. I was kind of read Amity's report or read a quote from her, and I think that she really benefited. She described it as she knows that she's good at the long game, and so she knows how to pace herself. And so, I think that was where she wanted to be as the defending champion, not going out too fast, but kind of pushing. In my montage of the ladies going through East Car Reserve Road, she looked the most serene of them, but there were a lot of like just intense faces. I mean, it just spoke to me how intense that was, and kind of this idea that was kind of all hands on deck to keep the pace. But we had two teammates, so Lauren and then Flavia were with Cinch Cycling, so that was definitely an interesting aspect of that. Amanda, looking kind of just at the first checkpoint or kind of how things went, were there any surprises? Obviously, you weren't in the race, you weren't following it, you were finishing your race at that point. But anything that kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Lauren had a pretty good lead. I mean, I would feel pretty confident with a 4.5 minute lead at that point. I don't know. Flavia's not in the checkpoint results.
She was there. She was there. Okay. I don't know if something what she was there.
Okay, got it. But like Casey Armstrong was in the group with Amity. I know she didn't finish the race, but she's still into that first checkpoint note. But yeah, I mean, Amity in 6th, I think she was like maybe 10th or 11th in 2019. So to me, I can tell that she pushed it maybe a little bit harder than she had in the past to want to be up a little bit closer maybe than she had been. And so it was good to see that she still kind of had that front end speed going into it. And yeah, I mean, those girls came in top 100, that was Amity was 90th and 91st overall going into that. So pretty cool to see that they kind of stuck it out even amidst all the crashes in the flats that were probably happening around them.
Yeah, and I guess from a personal standpoint, this was my low moment as a support crew, is that my buddy Dave was he told me, he's like, I'm not going to go out fast, I'm not going to go out too hard. He came in actually with the two women leaders, and I guess there's a video someone did where he was kind of looking for me because I wasn't expecting him. He told me he wasn't going to do that. But I will say this, Dave is one of the best bike racers I know. He is insanely strong. He is so good. Like, I wish I could be him. And that he hung with the women for 70 miles and then he blew up. So if you're looking at elite women and saying, oh, I can beat them if you're a man, I'm guessing that unless you're really good, you probably can't. Like, just the elite level. I don't know. I guess, Amanda, to get this experience of seeing someone who you really respect and just get absolutely his legs shredded. The women are strong. And I think it's kind of hubris to, if you look at it and be like, oh, I can beat you. I can beat these women. You probably can't. I mean, I don't know. I wanted to say that, like, so more so than in the past, I guess, because I had that barometer now of just the strength and skill and how good you guys are.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely. I mean, these women that came in, I mean, they were obviously hammering. Like, Olivia Dillon was in 13th, Tetrick was 12th, Jess Sarah was 14th. I could tell that it was very spread out, at least for those first 68 miles or so. Like, it was, I can tell that there were flats and a lot of things happening along the way that made it spread out that much. Makes me wonder how much different it could have been if maybe, the top 20 had been closer together going into that first one. And it makes me wonder next year, if they do change the course, how that will change dynamics and tactics. Because if they don't have something that's, blowing up wheels and shredding knees and completely demolishing the field 25 to 30 miles into the event, how does that change going forward?
Amanda, when you're kind of in this, it's very chaotic, like, a lot going on. So what's kind of your thought process? As a woman, you want to compete for the win, but like, you can't just be like, all right, I'm going to identify the top women and stick their wheels, because there's just so much going on, especially on, as we said, in this course in 2019, it was the same course. So what's your kind of thought process at the beginning, and what are you thinking and trying to do as things, especially, start to swirl around you?
Yeah, safety. That's the number one thing. I just heard so many horror stories of these, because the crashes, it's not just a regular crash. You crash and you take out all the people behind you, and it's not just like a nice little tip over. You just cheese grate yourself through these arrowhead like rocks, and it's not fun, and does not seem like something that I want to go through. So for me personally, and I know for a lot of the women, especially at the front here, that are trying to navigate that, it's trying to stay upright and try and stay out of trouble. And one thing I always tell people is find a wheel that you trust, and that's not easy in these events because maybe you don't know everybody, or it's a lot of people, or you find some guy's sketchy wheel in front of you and he has no idea what he's doing. It's little things like that you don't necessarily think about going into it if you've never been there before, but staying safe is really the number one thing, especially in those miles coming into the first checkpoint.
So from there, it and really kind of started to shake up. So, part of the story with Lauren was the flats that she suffered and the work that she had to do to battle back. And so looking at the Little Egypt split, she was 10 minutes at least behind the leaders, but we don't really know because Flavia was still in the lead. We were able to spot her in a group. So she was in a decent sized group when I was at Little Egypt. And so I don't have a time split on it, but that was kind of, she had gotten to that spot. And so, things were still then starting to break up. We had Emily Newsom had moved into second, Shane into third, and Amity into fourth. So it seems like things were starting to split up, and certainly, I guess you would have maybe been kind of scratching your head as to what happened to Lauren. And I guess to your point, she actually crashed and broke her collarbone on East Caw Reserve Road last year. So I think for her, probably just getting through that was a first little bit of redemption. And she has the worst luck. If you don't know her story, she suffered a traumatic brain injury. I believe it was at Tour of Gila, in a road crash, I think in 2016. And so she was on the verge of dying and spent months and months and months in rehab. And her big comeback was winning Crusher in the Tusher in 2018. And she found that she really liked gravel. And so it's a really neat story that she was able to find gravel and make it her new thing. And she did a pretty full calendar in 2019, suffered that unfortunate broken collarbone. But I don't know. It's pretty neat to see that she's a gravel specialist and definitely one of those riders with just this incredible backstory. I got to interview her and I wrote a story about it. And it was just like, you've been through all of this. And she has such a positive attitude about it too, which is really, really impressive. And probably helped her because this was a hard race and she had a big task in front of her. So at this point, I'm not going to lie, like Kevin Bouchard Hall was kind of ragging me. He was like, I think we need some accountability on the race preview. He's like, how many? He was like pulling that top 15. He's like, how many of these guys did you mention? You only got like 7 or 8 of them. Like, you're doing no good. And so I'm, of course, like, I've never heard, I know, don't do road. Like, I've never heard of Flavia Oliveira in my life. And so I'm like frantically texting Tim, like, Tim, give me the details. Like, I need some research. But it turns out she's pretty legit. She finished 7th at the Rio Olympics in the road race. So you get that on her Wikipedia page, but then you read down a little bit further. Bill, it seemed like we had a lot of controversy potential midway through this race. I think that we were really, the wheels were spinning on the controversy machine.
Well, just to finish your thought, since you left it with the Wikipedia page, I think that how to best put this: 1 tainted supplement may be a mistake. 3 tainted supplements over 3 different occasions over several years seems really, really, really unlucky, and the doping suspensions that go along with them. But what I wanted to ask Zach, and maybe I don't know if it was a counting issue or what, but you mentioned with Lauren that she had 1 teammate with her, but didn't she really have more than than that? And isn't that really the crux of what we need to talk about?
Sure, we can do that. We can do that now. So cinch cycling was super well represented. I mean, I saw their kits everywhere, and I guess I, being oblivious to all things road racing, had no idea what that meant. But cinch cycling is the team of Tom Daniel, and so who is? I mean, I guess I can't tell the story of the background on him. Bill, what is kind of the background? And why we care?
The background on Tom Danielson was he was going to be the next Lance Armstrong, and the way he became the next Lance Armstrong is that he raced for that team. He was a serial doper. He supposedly cleaned up, his act, and then got onto I think it might have been Garmin or whatever the team was at that point, Jonathan Vaughters teams, and then he got popped again, and same sort of thing. I think it was a supplement, it was testosterone. He got tested positive for testosterone, claimed up and down that he hadn't done anything wrong, but was not looked at as a positive force in cycling, and really not respected anymore. And then I guess has rehabbed himself to the point that he has this coaching business and has a lot of people that think he does good work at coaching. But from his past with that Discovery team and everything that went on in that, I think it's, for a lot of us who loved road cycling during that era and were kind of let down by many of these riders, it's a tough one to swallow to have him still in the sport. So I think that, and it gets really confusing because someone like Lauren, who you interviewed and who has this really compelling story, is now associated with Danielson. And it really just muddies the water, and it's tough. Bring in that they have these tactics that I think we're going to talk about now that are near and dear to Amanda's heart, and the issues of gravel and what really is the right way to win a gravel race, and then that this was a plan that Danielson and his team came up with. I think just doesn't make anything you want to think about the guy any better.
Yeah, so to not beat around the bush, basically they had a male rider whose job was to quote unquote shepherd Lauren through the race. She was their top rider. They were going to shepherd her, and I noticed this because I actually, at my photos of Lauren coming through East Cobb Reserve Road, he was right in front of her. And so I don't actually know like how long he stuck with them, but it's back to this. Yes, it's a mass start event. Men and women start together. And I think there's this acceptance that if women join a group, they're allowed to ride with them. We saw this at the end. So this guy did eventually get dropped because Lauren was riding her face off. And you saw on the live stream that she was riding with two other guys and kind of like sharing the workload in that group. And that's acceptable. That's how it works. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But it seems like they came in with like, they were just unabashed. Like, this guy is going to help her. And, I think we went through this in 2018 with the Keogh tandem. And it was quite controversial. And Amanda, you were involved in that for better or worse. And it seems like, from my perspective, what came out of that is that there was no resolution about whether or not it was right or wrong. And basically the conclusion generally in public was, well, there are no rules. It's not against the rules. It's fine. But like, if you literally talk to anyone involved in the gravel scene privately, they were like, we don't really think this is we don't think it's right. And I think that there's nuance and difference there. And it's very interesting / I guess controversial that they came in with a plan. They're like, we're going to do this, which I don't know. Me seeing the history, we talked about this a little bit in the green room. I would have been like, that's your plan? Really? Like, you're going to do that? Like, you're going to tell the world? Like, they had a story on Flow Bikes about how they were going to do it. Like, it was out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is, yes, the muddy waters again. And I think it's so interesting because we talked about this on our preview show. And I said, yeah, a guy pulling a girl, not so great. Maybe there are girls pulling girls and girl teammates. Maybe that's going to happen. And so the first few images that I saw of Flavia and Lauren riding together, I was like, oh, there, yeah, we called that. That was probably going to happen, right? And then, as the day goes on, we hear more and more stories, and there's so many layers to this onion that is the cinch cycling controversy of 2021. But whether or not you want to call it a controversy, I guess, is up to interpretation. But I got tagged in something yesterday where the guy who was riding for Lauren, Angus Calder, was saying exactly what you said, that his role was to shepherd her to the win, help her out however needed, and that happened to be fixing 2 of her flats, I guess, or 1. I don't know how many flats, but he helped her get it done quickly and get moving. And he was posting all about it, and somebody tagged me in it. He and I went back and forth and eventually got on the phone and talked about it today. And he was this very polite Australian, couple years out of U23 kid that wanted to ask me my opinion on it and why he was getting so much hate for talking so openly about what their decision was and what the tactics were. And I think it's interesting looking back on that conversation that I had with him, and part of the issue that I took with it was, if I was going to show up to an enduro or a downhill race or some sort of discipline I know nothing about, I would do all the homework I needed to do to make sure I wasn't going to go in there like a bull in a china shop and make stupid decisions and make a fool of myself. But maybe that's just me, and I don't understand. That was my first knee-jerk reaction, was like, why weren't you having this conversation with me a week ago? Or why weren't you reaching out to people and finding out, hey, has anybody ever done this before? Like, do you think you're the first person to ever think of this? Probably not. And maybe have those conversations of, has it happened before and is it cool? But that's maybe just me thinking that people care about this as much as I do, and that may not be the case. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I think my take on it is exactly what I said in the preview show, that this is racing and it's going to happen. There's nothing I can do about it except be maybe a little sad that has to be the natural evolution of this, and perhaps the only way that a woman can win in the future. But yeah, it's sparking interesting conversations right now, I guess, and people are having those tough conversations, and I don't think it means something like a separate women's field. I don't think it means that some woman's going to show up with 8 guys to shield her from the wind next year. There's something in the middle that'll happen as the next step in this.
That was going to be my question, is if it's getting to this point where it's becoming this professional racing, then should the men and women be on different days? Is this something that should happen? Should any of this possibility be taken out of the equation, or does that then just completely destroy what the gravel scene is trying to achieve and just brings it into just a road race on gravel?
That's a good question. I mean, I look at Amity also, I think, got tag teamed into that conversation. And she said, I love getting to be a part of this mass start event, though. And I think for the women, I mean, there's cycling's like 80% men, 20% women or something. And, oftentimes women are racing with fields that are quite small. And gravel, one thing that's neat about it is a chance to be a part of that bigger thing, of that bigger group. But Bill, to your point, at the same time, I remember at El Monzo in 2018, I happened to be riding with the lead group of women. And they, I was talking to one of them after it, and she said it was amazing to actually get to race a gravel race, because we all kind of like at around mile 75 of 100, we're just like, all right, we're just going to back off. And I think I've told this story. I was more than happy to not go hard anymore. Let me tell you, I was like, that's fine. So we were just kind of chilling, and they were attacking and doing moves, and it was awesome to see. And, I think for them, that's one thing that you maybe do lose, is that if it's this, if you're not in groups, if it's whether or not you pick the right wheel and you get the right group of men to shepherd you farther up the road, and that kind of defines things. I mean, maybe it would be more interesting. It would certainly be easier to cover. I think it would generate more coverage. It would be, if there was a separate thing. I don't think it's going to happen ever, but at the same time, I come back to there's so much riding on the line. People are making careers off this. Like, there have to be rules. Like, I mean, I guess people don't want that, but like, until you do, then it's just saying that this is okay. And we talked about in the preview that this, story that we were fed, that some woman offered a guy money to try to help her win. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, is that what's going to take for us to hear that would happen to a winner, and then people are going to get upset? Because the response is there's no rules. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as we keep saying that this is okay. And we being the gravel community and people, I think there are people in the community who have the voice who could define this in a way, but it might be. I think I defer to, friend of the program, Michael Bodenheimer. He chimed in on Twitter, and he asked, are we going to see a co-ed division? Are we going to see a co-ed men's and women's team division at gravel races? And maybe that'll be the route we go.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so silly when I take a step back and look at it all, this conversation. But one story that I haven't really told too publicly, that I told to Angus when I was on the phone with him, I said, in one of the years that I was doing this, I got to the last checkpoint, and there was one rider who stayed back from the woman that he was with to ride with me, to not do any work and sit on my wheel the whole time to make sure that I would never catch her. And it was like the most frustrating miles of my life. I was cursing at him. I never told the story because I was so irate about it and I didn't want to make a stink. But I told him because I was like, that's the flip side of this. If this is what happens in the future, and you're telling the other women that if they don't have the team tactics and the ability to do that to somebody else, that they're not going to be good enough to win, like, that's why you're going to have people that are frustrated and take issue with what you've done. And he was like, yeah, I never really thought of that. So it's just something to think about that was so hard for me to communicate in 2018, was like, there's another side of this too, and it's going to make it a big issue moving forward. But at the same time, I don't have an answer, and I don't want to be the person that's always saying, yeah, this sucks and it shouldn't happen, because then the answer is always going to be, yeah, well, there's no rules. And so then are there rules? And I don't want there to be. So I don't know what the answer is, like I said. And I think that, Lauren did a great job. And the part that frustrates me the most is that whatever dark cloud is sitting over this right now, she would have won 100% anyways. She's that strong. She did all the work. She put in the effort. She has this amazing story, and hats off to her, right? And I think that is what we should focus on, is that she did do such a great job, and I really commend her for being able to pull that off, especially with all the stuff that she's been through.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, I just even looked, like, this Angus dude wasn't even with her at the first checkpoint, so it's not like he was doing a majority of the work, but it sounds like the help. But I will say, and I said this in the preview, like, as a dude, this Angus guy clearly was not going to accomplish. He's not going to get anything but just finishing. He's not to say no, but pack fodder. And like, as a guy, and if you're a nice person, like, I can see why he was excited. He contributed to the women winning, and I would be in that same boat. Like, if I'd perhaps at this Almanzo, whatever, like a local gravel race, I might be strong enough that like I could do a lot of work for a woman to help her win. And they'll be like, I contributed something, and I'm not going to accomplish anything on my own though. And I can see why, why he was excited, and why it's something bigger than yourself. It's being on a team. Yeah,
I know. And it was so interesting talking to this Australian kid, Rhodey, that has no idea the world that he stepped into and why he's getting like fake accounts created and attacking him. And I'm like, oh, how do I say this? So it was also refreshing for me to hear it from somebody else's perspective, that like, hey, why isn't this a thing yet? I really don't get it. And for me to take a step back and say, yeah, it's silly. Here's why. But like, let's kind of hold hands and figure it out moving forward. Okay.
I do think that with all of this controversy that's out there and all these trying to figure this out, it comes back to, Zach, what the question was about co-ed, but I think also even more importantly, are we going to see split fields at some point. And the looming question in this is that, there are groups of people actually right now meeting in Switzerland at the UCI headquarters to go over what nefarious plans they have for the coming years in professional bike racing. And they're all looking at gravel. They all see all of the buzz that surrounded these races. They all see an opportunity to make money off of gravel racing if it is going to be this hot new thing. And once that happens, men and women aren't racing together. Like if these become UCI races, they are either like split out the start times to enough where the women will have enough of a buffer where they're finishing before the men, or it's just going to be on separate days.
Yeah, I mean, or like Jumbo Visma will be picking their domestiques for Marianne Vos from the men's team. Yeah. So I don't. To get back to the race, I'm sure we'd love to hear from your thoughts on this. But so I guess my other moment, I guess, for me in this race. So I found this hill right before checkpoint 2. So checkpoint 2 was in Council Grove. It was at like mile 150-ish or whatever. And kind of speaking to the really hectic, chaotic nature of the race is, I'm waiting, seeing everyone go by. And it's like, I see a Cinch cycling kit. And it was funny. I was like in the road taking a picture of Lauren coming over this climb. And I just heard like yelling at me. And I was like, oh shit. I'm like, I was nowhere near her, but I thought, she was just so buried. Like I've we've seen it happen. Like, get out of my way, get out of my way. She's like, but it turns out she's like, what place am I in? What place am I in? And I was like, I think you're in first. And she was like, cool.
That was the conversation.
You blew it, Zach.
Huh?
I would have been so proud of you if you had told her she was P1.
Ah! Well, I didn't know. I mean, I was like, I didn't see Flavia go through. I was like, I think you're in first. She's just like, cool. That was great. That was a great moment. So I guess I was the one who told her that she was in first for the first time.
That's awesome.
2 moments. I had 2 moments of this event. So I guess what was interesting with this, and so about 4 minutes behind them came Amity and Emily Newsom, and so the two of them were together. So you're like, all right, this is, I don't want to extrapolate from one race, but you're like, Amity Rockwell in second place, you're like, by God, that's Amity Rockwell's music, or like I was thinking like the Jaws theme. Just I think I tweeted that. And her gap was 6 minutes. I think it was 10 in 2019. Although Olivia suffered so many flats, I think that was different. But I was like, oh man, it's like game on. But by the time they had gotten to the checkpoint, which was only like 2 or 3 miles later, I think Amity had actually broken free. So it might have been on the climb. There was this climb after. I don't know what happened. So interesting decision. Amity goes solo, I think. Lauren, as we saw in the live stream, she hooked up with 2 dudes, and I think that's gravel, but that's kind of like the race, right? Like, Lauren kind of hooked up with this group, and I just think at that point it was just a function of her grinding it out. And I watched, like, I was actually at the checkpoint on my phone watching because I was like, I gotta see this coverage. She was sharing the work. I mean, they were definitely rotating through. They were riding abreast, so it wasn't a situation where she was just sucking. She's grinding, like she was contributing to the group, like a good contributing member, and that from there it was kind of her game. And a very impressive win.
Yeah. So Emily Newsom and Amity, you saw them together, and then Emily ends up 4th.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So maybe she was with Shayna Paulus. I guess I'd have to go back. I'm looking at the splits.
Yeah. Sorry. Emily ended up, that was at the 3rd checkpoint, and then Emily ended up 3rd. So Shayna.
So maybe it was Shayna, but like Amity had a 30-second gap at least coming into the checkpoint. So she had broken free from her, which I guess is just kind of, to me, is interesting because it's like, if I'm her, I'm like, all right, well, we don't know what's going on up the road. Like, let's stay together and see if we can do work together. But, I guess we saw that Amity probably at some point you also make the decision. You're like, I'm stronger and I can do better solo than, trying to work with someone if they're not feeling well. So
Yeah, and I'm stoked for Amity. I realized in the last episode that we recorded, you were hinting at the fact that she didn't want to come back, and I'd forgotten about
Remember
that.
our conversation?
That she was, yeah, I totally forgot that she was threatening to do Lost and Found and not come back for this. So it was, nice to see her do that. And like I said, she pulled it together when it counted. And I was super proud of her for putting in that effort. And same thing, Emily Newsom getting third. I think she won Gravel Locos and came out of that with huge confidence boosts and knew that she was fully capable of doing well in these long events, and just brought that out there in Kansas, and I was super stoked to see that. Her quote, I think, to Cycling News was that riding out there was comparable to childbirth. So I guess I know closely what that would feel like. I thought that was an interesting comparison. And then Whitney Allison in fourth, who had just won that desert gravel race that was a couple weeks ago. And then Shayna Palace in fifth. And then the triathlete in sixth, which I said, look out for the triathletes. And sure enough, she motored her way up into sixth place.
One point that I wanted to make about Emily Newsom is that after my preview, someone had contacted me, friend of the Bulletin, and been like, "You forgot Emily Newsom." And then like 4 minutes later, she's registered for the 100. I think she switched her registration. So it was Emily Newsom that Amity. So she must have had a mechanical or something, because she dropped back precipitously, but I was just looking at my photo and there's no name. So it's really cool. You get your name on your number plate when you register. You get the full 9 yards, but nameless number plate. So I'm pretty sure, and tip co-rider. So I think that was Emily and not Shayna. So yeah, she messed with the program by just being a ringer and jumping in, and she pulled off that top three to make me look bad. So I shake my fist at you, Emily Newsom, for not registering. No, I'm kidding. An amazing ride, a great ride for her, and it's awesome to see her have that success and turn what she accomplished at the other races into success there. So
I wonder if it was just like she'd registered it or they had her listed wrong or what. I mean, I don't know, Amanda, you could speak to this. That's got to be a decision. You can't just decide at the last minute, I'll sign up for the 100. Now I'm just going to do it.
I think some people can. There's strings that can be pulled.
No. I'm just saying preparing for that. If you are prepared to do the 100 and then you just decide at the last second, I'm going to add another 100 on top of that, it seems like that kind of planning would have happened before.
Okay.
But maybe there are people that can just like tack on another 100 and not worry about it.
Yeah, I guess if you're a Tibco rider, those ladies are strong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think it was interesting. Some of the riders I think that we picked in the preview. I know I picked Olivia Dillon, and I saw her at the finish line, and I was like, the start line. I was like, I picked you to win. So she had a tough day. Allison Tetrick. I mean, I had gotten to the point where I just expected Tetrick to, 19 second place, like super solid, just doing the thing. So one thing that was interesting, I guess, so we talked about the men and we talked about how you got to have world tour talent to win. I think the women's field is infinitely more interesting. It just seems more fluid. It seems like there's a lot more up in the air in terms of what the narrative of who can be successful at this discipline. Our last 5 winners are all, I'm just going all the way back to you, Amanda, are gravel specialists, Tetrick, that's what she does now. Amity, very much a gravel specialist. Lauren, that's what she does now. So it just seems like very fluid to me at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one thing I was thinking about scrolling through the results and reading some of the riders' recaps on Instagram, there were a lot of first-timers that made comments about how they had no idea it was going to be that hard, how it was the hardest thing ever, the most terrible day on the bike, they couldn't eat, it was so hot, the rocks were worse than they expected. And so this is my bid for everybody who's been there before to also talk about how terrible this event is, please, because I think we do a very good job of sugarcoating all of these stories and talking about how great it was in the race and these guys ended up in the front and it was so rad, but we'd never talk about the 2,000 other people that were vomiting and had 17,000 flats and mechanicals and was absolutely terrible. So I find it hilarious that so many of the noobs were like, I had no idea this was going to happen. It's like, yeah, because we don't talk about the bad stuff. And I think it could be a cool thing on Athlinks where you could log in afterwards and like have little buttons for your terrible achievements like vomit, bathroom break, flat tires, so that you know why Olivia Dillon didn't win. It has like 17 pukes on it or something. You know, I think it would be funny to see and would give better perspective for people down the road who look at these results and they're like, I could win DK. It's like, yeah, but do you know what happened to all these people?
Save it for the book.
Yes.
No, I think that was kind of, Amanda, like kind of what I was saying earlier is like, it's kind of hubris to be like, oh, I'm just going to totally rock this and it'll be great and there will be no problems. I think there's just so many different things that can come up. And I think sticking around and seeing, past the leaders. So typically like checkpoint 2, I would be there for the women and then I'm out. Right. Mm-hmm. So we're still talking top 50 athletes at this event. I stuck around to see like people were finishing in the 200s and the 300s, and it is a totally different story when you get down there of people just being wrecked. It is so hard. It was so hot. The sun was so unbearable. I mean, my guys were talking about how they physically could not eat food. Like they could not put food in their face. They were running out of water, just every which way, and just how brutal and unforgiving. And it's funny. I saw Leland Danes after the race, and he was like, "Oh well, good. Yeah, I'm glad that Quinn crashed out. People have more respect for how hard this race is. You can't just come in here and rock it." So that's what they want. Exactly. It's brutal. It's true. And Amanda, despite everything I've seen, despite covering it 3 times now, my friend's telling me that it's the worst thing they ever do. I think I'm going to do it next year. Like
what?
I know. I don't know. It just seems like one of those, and this gets to trying to explain what it is I want to see if I can do it. Like, and I think that is the ultimate, that's why it sells out. That's why there's a lottery. That's why people come from across the world now to do this event. It is like potentially one of the top 3 hardest things you can do on a bike, and I wanted to see if I can do it.
Oh, that's awesome. And I hope a lot of people listening to this feel the same way, that there is this mystique about it and you wonder, can you finish 200 miles? And I love hearing that, because that's the same thing that brought me to the Flint Hills, and I hope it inspires a lot of other people to think the same way.
Yes.
Bill.
Yeah, I mean, just coming down. So the finish is probably 5 or 6 blocks long, and down Commercial Street is, the drag, and they announce every finisher, and we're talking 4 or 5 hours after the winners finish. There's still people cheering and giving high fives and stuff, and credit. We don't want to forget our friend Becca. They're giving all these foam fingers. She actually snagged a foam finger and did foam finger high fives, which was just like very on brand for Becca Fahringer. But I don't know. I mean, it's just that awesome atmosphere. It's a party. Like, it's a party around bikes. We talk about, people coming to the city in, Emporia. You tell people, oh, I'm going to Kansas. They're like, oh, I feel sorry for you. I'm like, I don't feel sorry for myself. I'm going to like this incredible event. At the end of the day, I'm sugarcoating again. But as everyone finishes, like people wanting to come to an event for bikes. And I think we're so desperate for that, of positivity and good things surrounding bikes instead of negativity and 8 people at a crit or whatever, no one coming out. Like, it's just so incredible to see, and you can't help but want to be a part of it and suffer. I mean, you can always just come do the 100. There's a 100, there's a 50, there's a 25. The 25 and the 50 are the day before. You could do the 50 the day before and then do the 100 and still get 150 miles in. Like,
I'm going to keep trying. I
won't say no.
Oh, no.
Not saying yes.
So we had another question. I don't know how to answer this, but what is the number one story coming out of Unbound this year?
It's back.
I'll give my lame one. I think that it was a success, and it happened, and it was awesome.
Yes.
I think the number one story is that Zach is back on for gravel.
Yes.
You had some dark times there as far as gravel is concerned, but it seems like you're fully back to wanting to cover it and wanting to race it. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, no, I'm bummed that I won't be able to go to more of these events. I don't have enough PTO to be able to go, but man, Unbound is just, it's awesome. It's cool. It's fun to shoot too. I mean, I know some people have talked about the challenges, but I think it presents a different challenge. We were joking about, I snagged some. So the joke is in cyclocross, you always do foreground course tape. So you'll see so many photos where, we do foreground course tape, and I was able to do some foreground flowers. I think it's a fun challenge to work with the landscape, and you get those just beautiful, I don't know, just like how small you must feel, as I guess maybe I'll get to experience this, but like how small you are when you see that you're the only person in this vast landscape shot that people take, and it's just you. And it's beautiful, but you're at mile 150 and you're suffering, and there's just no one. There's 1,000 other people out on this course, and you're just alone. I don't know. It's just really neat. It's a different kind of like storytelling, and versus like the intensity of, Bill, you were just at a crit, like it was speed. It was, that intensity. It's a different kind of thing. So it's fun to cover as a journalist. If you're one of the few people who's a journalist or a photographer or a videographer and you haven't gone to Unbound yet, I recommend you go. But I'm pretty sure like everyone remotely associated with gravel was there.
Yeah, and next week, Amanda, with some formation of people we still need to figure out, you are going to tell us what it's like to be the only person in a vast landscape and you can't see any of it.
Yes. Why? Yeah. So wildly different perspective. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about the 350 miles that I was out there, most of it alone. So if there are questions, please send them my way. If you're wondering how it was, how my gear worked out, what worked and what didn't, I'd be happy to talk about that in a podcast. But I do want to say, I do think the number one story was that it happened. And it happened in a way that made everybody excited again. Zach was probably the best example of that because he was such a bummer for part of last year. And we all felt that. And it was a good way to come back, see people have a good time. For anybody that hasn't been to a big event yet in the past few weeks, please know that it is an amazing feeling to get back and see people again. I know that I really needed that, and I really needed to feel that sense of community and belonging again, as odd as that sounds, but it's something that we need as humans, and that was the main thing that I took away from this, was that we could all get back and do this thing that we love and have a good time doing it.
And of course, 2 weeks from now, or probably soon, will be the return of the original Gravel Power Rankings.
Oh, yes.
Often imitated, never replicated.
We'll see you next time.
The Slow Ride Podcast. 3 idiots who are usually wrong.
The Slow Ride Podcast. The titanium of podcasts.
The Slow Ride Podcast. It's like if David Vanderpool had a podcast.
The Slow Ride Podcast. The Zwift racing of podcasts.
The Slow Ride Podcast. Find the real advice.
The Slow Ride Podcast. The Arrow helmet of podcasts.
The Slow Ride Podcast. Sport leader coming through.
The Slow Ride Podcast. When's Lance gonna sue us?
The Slow Ride Podcast. The experts in French cycling.
The Slow Ride Podcast. Official fan experience zone on Facebook.
The Slow Ride Podcast. The gravel bike of podcasts.
The Slow Ride Podcast. Both vertically and horizontally compliant.
The Slow Ride Podcast. New episodes every Tuesday.